Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us at Microsoft Power BI UK User Group. I'm your host, Leon Gordon, and we're back with another fantastic session. Today we're joined by the fabulous DeNisha Malone. Now, DeNisha is joining us as a Microsoft MVP, and I'll just give you a bit of a background on DeNisha. She's known as the BI Queen, and she's a business intelligence data solutions architect, and she's a Power BI expert from Memphis, Tennessee. She's also the founder of a company called Data Harmony, which is a training and business intelligence company, and she helps small businesses around the world modernize their data strategies. Now, she's also the VP of Strategy for Black Data Processing Associates of Memphis, and she's the co-lead of the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion in Data Careers virtual group, and also, as I'm sure many of our user group are aware, she co-leads the Power BI Women user group. So for those of you that are involved in the Microsoft community, please do go over and make sure that you join and follow that fantastic user group. So without any further ado, I will hand you over to DeNisha.
Thank you, Leon. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Today, I'll be sharing with you Power BI Adoption Framework. And just before I hop in, just a little bit more about me in regards to BI. I've been practicing data strategy and business intelligence since about 2015, starting with Power BI and eventually mastering other tools in the data industry. I do enjoy sharing my knowledge throughout community events like this one and by organizing local and virtual groups, as Leon mentioned. So just to hop right into the presentation, I'll be sharing with you 2 strategies to adopt Microsoft's Power BI. First, why an adoption strategy? What is an adoption strategy? So with an adoption strategy is where you identify roles, responsibilities, and best practices that help users understand and use a new product. Some common challenges that I've experienced when working with customers when trying to adopt Power BI, or customers that already have Power BI and just want to enhance the adoption. Some common challenges are general usage, which can be based around licensing, who gets a license, who doesn't get a license, what comes with a free versus pro versus a premium license. General uses can also be based on user adoption in general, and that's how to create a center of excellence, which is like an internal discussion where users will post policies, ask and answer questions, and share knowledge. So those are some general use cases that are generally challenges. Another thing is governance. Governance challenges are usually based around user management and analytics, policy control, tenant administration, and resource monitoring. Third challenge is data management, which is quite a large challenge that a lot of customers deal with, which makes sense because it's a data industry. So how to manage the data quality, common data models, which are better known as CDM. And these are common data tables that are used across an organization. They can identifying and strategizing these common data models that are common can reduce your resource usage and also reduce the amount of reports that are reporting the same information. Security is a challenge when it comes to adopting Power BI. Security is most time more important because it's security and you have the data laws for user access and things like that. So customers may ask of Active Directory user groups, so how to manage those, and also data access and sharing. Before you roll out a new application, you want to first identify the roles of adoption. So who will be responsible for what and what they'll be doing. So you want to identify those roles and even give those responsibilities to people in your organization. So the first role here, there are consumers. Consumer is the lower level. These are most of the time going to be free users when working with Power BI. These users will make decisions from content that's created by developers, power users, and analysts. The second level here, analysts. Analysts will view and edit content that's been created by BI developers, power users, and other analysts. Power users, they will create and publish content for other departments and teams. So these are actual developers. The Power BI or the BI development team will be more of a compact, approved team that's just for BI, and they'll create enterprise-wide products. They'll create the data models to be used by other analysts. They'll create reports, applications, and even give insights for departments throughout the business. The web development team, which in some cases organizations may not have a web development team, depending on how they're using their BI and if they're actually embedding reports inside of websites and creating applications and web apps and things like that. But if you are having those kind of products, then you may want to consider a web development team, and that team will develop those internal and external applications, and they'll handle the embedding the reports inside of those web solutions. And then you have the IT operations. IT operations, they ensure the day-to-day operations go smooth. Most organizations have this team, and you will reach within this IT operations team to find like the web developers and the BI developers. So that IT operations team will make sure that operations go smoothly. They resolve any urgent infrastructure problems and configure the Power BI settings, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And the last thing here, the IT minor enhancements and support. That's a team that will support the enterprise-wide content and products. They'll maintain solutions. They'll make any minor enhancements within the product, solve any complex issues that the IT operations team cannot solve. They'll monitor the usage and also monitor the performance of the tenant, which is really important if you have a premium environment. So if you have any questions, you can hold them out to the end. I have time for questions, but please be sure to jot them down so you don't forget them. So now you are ready to adopt Power BI. You've made the decision that Power BI is good for your company. Maybe you've never used the BI tool before, maybe you have, but you never used Power BI. So you made the decision that you want to use Power BI. And these are the steps that you would take to adopt Power BI in your organization appropriately. This is my 3-week plan. So it could be longer, it could be shorter, depending on you can have longer workshops, which we'll talk about the details in a bit, but you can include some time to develop actual products before you roll out to the organization. And it could be longer if you actually create documentation and policies. So depending on your documenting and your workshops of training, this 3-week plan can be 4 weeks or even could be shorter, but you probably won't get a shorter plan. Okay, ignore the trash truck outside. Real life over here. Okay, so this is a 3-week plan to adopt Power BI if you've never had it before. The first thing you want to do is have a workshop with your IT stakeholders. Those stakeholders could be like the director of BI and data strategy. It can be the IT manager and the CIO. The CTO, I'm sorry, CIO, CTO, these are all the stakeholders that are going to be managing the strategy, to have an input and a say-so in the data strategy of the organization. So in this workshop, you would review whatever the data strategy is that includes Power BI. You will identify who does what based on those 7 responsibilities in the last slide. So you already know those responsibilities. You already know who would be assigned to what. And in this workshop, you will be discussing it with the stakeholders. You also want to review and customize any workshop content based on the business model. So at this point, you will already have, which I will provide to you in this, what each workshop would be and an outline of the content. So by the time you meet with the workshop with the IT stakeholders, you will review the workshop content and just tweak it based on the business model. And also you want to discuss any risk, which is important because you're rolling out a new application and you want to know if there are any risks, small or large, within the organization that can lead to anything. So you want to discuss that with the IT stakeholders. Once you've done that workshop, you want to then go into workshop planning. Workshop planning is where you would document the customized adoption strategy that you got from the IT stakeholders. You will outline the workshops based on the strategy, and you would also invite those user groups that you want to have training in the workshops. This workshop planning will not involve any of the stakeholders. It's really just the internal planning within you and whoever is on the adoption team or whoever's managing the adoption or the rollout of Power BI. Once you've internally created the workshops, you've planned out the workshops, you want to follow up with the IT stakeholders and review that plan. So this can be just a half a day. It really doesn't take a whole meeting, but you can have a 30-minute meeting. I prefer meetings because you get things out of the way. So just a quick meeting to follow up with the plan and the IT stakeholders of what you've talked about. And you will just get an approval for the plan. So really quick. Once you've gotten that plan approved, then you actually want to go into those half-day workshops. I put 8 half-day workshops here just because being familiar in the corporate environment, people are doing other things. You really don't want to take a whole day away unless it's critical. You're really trying to push out Power BI for training. You want to give some space so people can breathe and come back the next day. So I put 8 half-day workshops here, but they can be 4 full day, depending on how you want to run your company. So you go into the 8 half-day workshops. There are 4 different topics. So there are 4 topics. Depending on the content, these could be longer or shorter, as I mentioned, based on your customized plan. During the workshop, the business is going to customize their rollout plan based on whatever needs of the organization. So you'll understand this once I get into the workshops, what the content of the workshops will be. But during those actual workshops, you want to get feedback from those attendees and create an actual rollout plan for Power BI that's going to work for everyone. Once you have the workshops done, so that's the biggest part of your adoption is the workshops. Once that's done, you're going to go into documentation and strategy. This is where you will create documentation from the changes of the plan that happened in your workshops. Microsoft does have strategy documentation in the GitHub where you can create your own, or you can create your own strategy. So they do have strategy documentation where you fill it out and it's more organized, or you can create your own or tweak what's there and do something that works for you. But whatever works, but this is where you want to document. You will also share the documentation with leaders and the user groups. So whoever attended those workshops, they should see the strategy, the planning, and the documentation that came out of those. And after the workshops, most of the time, the rollout plan could change based on the workshops. More than likely, it's going to change based on what happens in the workshops. So you want to use this time, strategy planning and documentation. You want to use this time to also realign with the stakeholders and prepare them for a phased rollout. After everything's strategized, documented, everyone understands what their roles are, you then want to create a center of excellence. A center of excellence, or a COE, is a place where users, regardless of their responsibility, can ask questions, get answers, review company policies, and also share knowledge. So a place can be Teams. Teams is really popular for this. SharePoint. Some people use SharePoint and create their own environment there. Slack, just some environment where people can have their own community within the organization. Once you've created your community and you've added your users, you want to then start your rollout of Power BI. So the rollout, preferably, I would suggest for it to be phases, so you can test how people are accepting it, how people are using it, monitor the usage, make sure that the resources aren't being overloaded. That's what I mean by phases. So phase 1 would be probably finance. And most times people would prefer finance to go first because finance deals with a lot of data, or HR, someone who can consume the data and use Power BI to ensure that your strategy is actually working for the company. So you roll out Power BI and then you start to monitor. That's the 3-week plan. After let's wait for a second. So this is a 2-week plan. So this is for users this is for a use case that's for an organization has been using Power BI already, but they're interested in better administration, better monitoring, more user acceptance, things like that. In this case, it's a smaller adoption strategy. I have a 2-week plan, but just like the 3-week plan, this can be longer or shorter depending on the stakeholder meeting and what the company is looking for. So to start this, you would review the Power BI environment. When you review the current state, you would include some people like the director of BI, the IT manager, and in this case, what's different is that you would have the Power BI administrator, which you should have, but it's not. Sometimes it's not. It's really not rare to have to come into a company that doesn't have a Power BI administrator. This is a good time to discuss who that would be with the stakeholders. But if you have one, they will definitely be included in this conversation. While you're reviewing the Power BI environment, you want to define and update any documentation that defines responsibilities. So if you want to just review those roles. So you should already have some people that are maybe doing some things. Maybe you have some people that are stretched across a few roles. At this point, you want to review those responsibilities, those people, and and you want to just make sure you have those things documented and understand if you need to switch some things up. You want to also review and customize the workshop content, just like 3-week plan based on the business model, and also discuss any risks. You don't want to forget to discuss the risk because risk management is very important when it comes to anything really, like life. But risk management is important when it comes to adopting something new and bringing in people to learn a new tool. So don't forget to discuss risk management. Once you've reviewed the Power BI environment, you understand what the stakeholders want when it comes to a better environment, and you have those responsibilities listed and you know who is who. You want to then plan your workshops. You want to plan your rollout, your adoption strategy, and also follow with the IT stakeholders. So this should be a little shorter than before because a lot of the workshop content you might not have to share simply because a lot of the workshop content has a lot of beginner stuff in it for people who've never used Power BI. So because you've already using Power BI, your workshops are probably going to be shorter, and this whole strategy is just it's a shorter time frame. But while you're planning and following up with your IT stakeholders, you want to make sure that you do document any changes. I call it a re-adoption plan. So that's what we're going to call it. You have an adoption plan and you have a re-adoption plan. So this is your re-adoption plan, and you want to make sure that you document any changes that you've made with the stakeholders to your re-adoption plan. You want to also outline the workshops. So what are you going to talk about? You want to also invite those users to those workshops, those calendar events, and you want to update the stakeholders. So once you've done all of that, then you're ready for your workshops. Instead of 8 half-day workshops, I have 4 half-day workshops here, and that's only because I said a lot of that content will be cut out. But maybe you need the full. Power BI is so new, and a lot of times organizations haven't done the best job when it comes to adopting Power BI. So even though you've been using it, you still will probably do the adoption plans if you've never used it, just to give that knowledge to users. So that if you want to do that, that's a lot of customers do that. But if you want to just break things down, then 4 half-day workshops will suffice in giving that knowledge to the users. Once your workshops are done, you go right into your documentation and strategy, just as before. You can use the Microsoft provided strategy documentation, or you can create your own. You want to then share that documentation with the leaders and the users that attended the workshops. Then you want to create or update, if you already have one, you want to create and update your Center of Excellence. Here you want to engage or add those power users and analysts and consumers, add everyone to that Center of Excellence and actually engage them in conversation once they're in that environment. And then you want to roll out your new plan. So phase 1 of your new plan, just as before, the best thing to me is to roll roll Power BI out in phases, regardless of if you're doing the readoption or the fresh adoption, figure out a phased rollout. Okay, so now I'm going to review the adoption workshops. I'm going to pause here and ask if there are any questions.
Definitely. So we do have a question, DeNisha, and that is, when you approach a rollout, what happens? How do you overcome obstacles?
Well, that's a very broad question because obstacles, it depends. I guess it depends what kind of obstacle, but as I approach the rollout plan, I think handling the risk conversation definitely handles a lot of obstacles that could happen, because you do want that discussion to be a lot of this could happen, this might, the mights, the coulds. You want to talk about those. But if you're actually you're rolling out Power BI, you're actually done with all the workshops, and something happens that goes south, then you just want to phase back. That's why the phase rollout is really important, because you can just phase back and figure out what went wrong in that new phase, and then fix it. Go back to your strategy documentation, which is why you should document. So this process sets you up for a good rollout. So you really want, the best advice is to phase back, so you don't have to quit the whole rollout. You just kind of start over that wherever you were.
Fantastic, thank you. And one final question before we move on. Stakeholder engagement. How do you deal with the adoption process with backwards and forwards with stakeholders? If you can't get a stakeholder on board, for example, what are some of the techniques that you have used to stay on track?
Well, stakeholders like to see proof of concepts, which is a POC. So a lot of times with stakeholders that are a little tough when it comes to adopting the strategy, I just have a proof of concept to show that you always want to show success, have a proof that something is successful. So a lot of times in that stakeholder meeting, I would start the meeting with how this strategy or how Power BI could help the organizations and their data strategy. So which is why I mentioned you want to know what the data strategy is for the organization. So you, as a Power BI expert, advocate, whatever your role is, you'll know how Power BI can fit, how Power BI and the strategy can fit whatever that stakeholder's needs are. So understanding what each individual stakeholder is looking for when it comes to data strategy, because to be honest, they're all looking at it at different angles. You don't really know. They're all looking at it at different angles. So what could work for one stakeholder may not work for another, but knowing each stakeholder's needs can allow for you to have a conversation with each stakeholder and satisfy those things. So my advice for that would just be to understand those stakeholders. And if you have to meet with them one-on-one, which I've done that before, because sometimes you just can't have all of them in one room, then you just have to do those things.
Fantastic, great answer. Thank you, DeNisha.
Thanks for those questions. Okay, so let's review what the adoption workshops look like. And I'll kind of break these down. These are the 4 adoption workshop topics. You have governance, service management, security, and rollout and support. So I'll go through each one of these and just show you. I won't show you the entire workshop, but I'll show you kind of the things that you talk about in each. So first is governance. In the governance workshop, this is where you'll decide what the phases are. So those phases that I mentioned, you want to talk about what that will look like, what's phase 1, what's phase 2, and so on. You also customize any strategies for your company culture. This means that you have a data strategy, and within a governance workshop, this is going to be a lot of the administrators, a lot of the people who handle user access. So this may mix with some of the security users. So IT operations, the BI team, they're going to be in here to talk about what the strategy is and how can we customize that to make sure that our company culture aligns with whatever a successful strategy may look like. You're in the governance workshop, you're also going to determine your initial principles and goals. So what is the goal of our BI environment? It sounds like an easy question, but that's a real conversation. So what's the goal here? What are we doing with these reports? Do we want people to create their own reports? So you want to talk about that. You want to clarify ownership and business information and also content. And so this is just says who owns what. If you have 3 servers, then who owns what server, so you know who's contact for who. So that's really just a documentation point. You also want to define who has access to see and request content. And that's also just a conversation of server access and what you have in the business based on what you have in the business compared to what you want people to access and report on. So you want to review at a high level. You want to review all of your data infrastructures at a high level and figure out what kind of reporting is going to come from that. And then you want to balance your centralized control for a decentralized environment. That's a heavy point. But what this is saying is that you want to make sure that you are controlled at the center, because Power BI is a self-service tool. So you really can't control it at every angle and at an external level, because people can access data, people can create reports. Power BI Desktop is free, as you know. So anyone can download Power BI. So you want to make sure that even though the external is very decentralized, it's really everyone's kind of have their own thing, they do their own thing. You still want to balance the center of that. So you still want to have control without having control. I know that sounds crazy, but that's really what's happening. And so the Microsoft product development team came up with this great quote, and I think it's exactly what I'm trying to say. And it's discipline at the core, flexibility at the edge. So that's perfect for BI, Power BI especially, because it's super flexible, super self-service, but it can get out of your hands really fast if you don't control it. So the discipline at the core is going to allow for that flexibility. The next workshop is service management. Service management, in that workshop, you'll talk about account management, Active Directory, and account management. So that's just user groups, and if there are any user groups, then what that looks like, who's managing the accounts. So that's the global admin is the person who's adminning the O365 tenant. They're going to be a part of this conversation. So that's just, so having that person there, you'll understand groups and a little more of security when it comes to account management. In the service management workshop, you'll also talk about subscriptions and licensing. So how many licenses you're going to get to start with, who gets a license. A lot of my consulting contracts in the past, when it comes to talking about licensing, I always create a process of getting a license. You really just don't want to give licenses out. You really want to figure out who needs a license. If they're going to just view a report and download data, they don't need a license, but they may think they do. So during this time, you want to talk about if you're going to create a license, a process of approval for Power BI licensing, then what that will look like. And also, if you want to create any kind of high-level subscriptions to understand if someone maybe creates a report, you can create APIs to handle those kind of things to manage the service. Then you want to, in this workshop, you'll also talk about group creation and the organization of apps. And this is just workspaces. So how you're going to create workspaces and how you're going to organize those apps if you have a premium environment. So we'll talk about that. And in this same conversation, you will know if it's going to be a pro or premium environment because you have that licensing conversation. So based on the direction of how this goes, you kind of branch off into different things in this service management workshop. Another thing that you will discuss is the enterprise IT management and usage. So how are you going to manage and use Power BI at an enterprise level? Are you going to get the report server to host your own reports? How are you going to manage the usage? Are you going to embed it in web portals? So figure out how you're going to actually use Power BI at an enterprise level and figure out the things that you need to manage that successfully. You want to also discuss monitoring, which is more a discussion with security and could be governance, but service management monitoring. Service management is going to provide the monitoring. So a lot of the things that you can monitor in Power BI is within the online service. So you can monitor if someone creates a workspace, if someone removes a workspace, if someone publishes something. You can monitor a lot of those user activities. So you want to make sure within that service management conversation, you understand the things that you can monitor, how you're going to monitor it, how often you're going to monitor it, those things. And the last thing that you want to discuss is the administration portal. You will have whoever you're assigning to be your Power BI administrator or capacity administrator. They're going to be in this meeting, and you want to review the administration portal. I suggest reviewing it live so everyone in that service management workshop knows what that administration portal looks like. They know the tenant settings, they know those options. You really don't want to review that with just one person, because what happens when that person leaves? So you want to think about those things and make sure that the administration portal has been reviewed and you've updated any of the settings that from those default settings that you don't want. So think about that. The next workshop is security. In the security workshop, you talk about data location. So are you going to have on-premise data? Is your data on-premise? Are you going to move it? Is it on the cloud? Is it in the cloud? Are you going to keep it there? How do you access that data on-premise or on cloud? The gateways, what do the gateways look like? So you're going to talk about that here. Also, within the data access conversation, you want to talk about row-level security. So a lot of times you can create that. I'm not a DBA, so I don't know the exact term for this. I did, but you can create a security, just like RLS and Power BI. You can have that same access on the server, where based on that level, based on that user email or the access from the user, they can only see a certain level of data. And a lot of times before you introduce BI into an environment, they don't have that. Oh, it's called security trimming. I have it right here. But security trimming is what that is on the server. And a lot of times if you don't have a BI, if you're not doing reporting, no one's creating their own reports, then they probably don't even know they have access to data they're not supposed to have access to. But when you open up Power BI, it's so easy to just open up a server and review everything that you have access to. And you want to make sure that you trim that down before you roll out phase one. So that's a conversation here. And you also want to talk about the common data models. So look at the entire organization and figure out the common models across departments, so you can create those views or whatever you need to do to make sure that everyone's accessing the same data and reporting from maybe the same view, or create an easy reporting environment for those CDMs. The last thing that you want to discuss, that I recommend you discussing in security workshop, is data sharing. And data sharing is also, all of these things are important. But within the data sharing conversation, you want to talk about workspaces versus apps. So who can create a workspace? If you want any workspace policies, then you want to review what that looks like. And the same thing with apps. So you will have that conversation. And because this is, if you've never used Power BI, you want to actually talk about what a workspace versus an app is. So you would define what those things are and how they contrast. You also want to talk about security groups. So this is really who can access what based on who you give that role to, and who they can share it with. So and the last thing is public and versus internal sharing. And so this is, if you want to share it with a Gmail, there's a setting in the tenant where you can share with users outside your organization, and enabling that allows for you to share publish reports with like Gmail users or Yahoo, any other, there's someone outside of your tenant. And that's important to monitor that, because you want to know who's sharing with who. And if you want to just turn it off completely, that's a conversation that you want to have here to see if that's what you need to do. But you want to manage that in this workshop and discuss how you're going to handle and administer the sharing of data and reports here. Last workshop is Rollout and Support. The Rollout and Support workshop is more for the community and the users. So it talks about how we're going to roll out Power BI and support it. The first thing you want to do is determine any training needs. So if you want to actually have developers developing training, DAX training, premium training, things like that, you want to determine if you want those things and how are you going to, what part of the phase is that going to be in. You want to implement change management, create a change management plan. Depending on the size and the level of your organization when it comes to BI and advanced analytics, is really when I recommend a change management plan. You should really always have it, but most of the times, if the company is small, then you can manage the changes as they're changing. But a change management plan will allow for you to manage when someone wants to make a change to a report or a workspace or an app. If they want to add a security group or a user group, then they have to create a request approval process. So that's something you want to discuss if you even want to do. Also, the Center of Excellence user community. So you discuss here in this workshop what you use. So are you going to use Teams? Are you going to use Slack? Are you going to use some third party? So what works for COE based on your business model and your company culture? And I suggest you actually creating it during this workshop so you have it when you finish. And you discuss support. So you want to define and discuss support centers. Are you going to have internal support? Are you going to have external support? How are users going to get support? Is there going to be a ticketing system? So you want to have that conversation here, which is very, very important. If I was highlighting, I would highlight that because if a problem happens and you can't really have access to Microsoft as quickly as like an MVP or a Microsoft employee, you would have to create a ticket. It's really hard to get support from Microsoft if you don't have your own internal support team. So you want an internal support team that can then escalate tickets to Microsoft if it becomes something that they cannot handle. In the rollout and support workshop, you also want to discuss your rollout plan. So you have the option of a phased versus an organization-wide rollout, which, as you know, probably by now, I don't recommend an organization-wide rollout because you can have problems and then you can't really phase back. You have to really start over. So I do not recommend that at all, but I have it here so you can see your options. But when discussing what kind of rollout you want to take into consideration capacity planning. So how much capacity you have at each phase, or if you're going to do organization wide, do you have enough capacity to do that? You want to align the phases with training. So align your rollout with training. If you probably not going to train everybody at once. I don't recommend that. Maybe you do. But you want to discuss what that looks like. And also auditing. What does auditing of the user activity look like? You want to review how you do that for a rollout, and the best way is to really use the API to get user activity from Power BI. So as you're discussing a rollout, as you're planning your rollout, as you're actually phasing out, you want to have a working auditing process. So as users are using the new tool, you can see how they're interacting with it live. The next thing that you'll discuss in a rollout and support workshop is communication. You really just want to communicate. So how are you going to communicate with the users? When you actually communicate with users, you want to make sure that you give them the license assignments. So you have to provide them with the knowledge that they have a new license and what that license means, what they can do, what they can't do. You have to communicate that to your users. You want to provide those users with key contacts. So who's the support team? Who's the BI development team? Who handles web development? So you want to make sure that no one's guessing these things. So you want to give those key contacts to your users, and also documentation on getting started. If you don't want to create your own documentation, then there's lots of documentation on Microsoft Docs that provides users with how to get started with Power BI. But you want to make sure you, as organizational leadership, provide resource links to that documentation. So I'm going to stop it here. Any questions?
We do indeed. So we have a question from Fernando Calero, and he asks, he recently got a question from a client's IT guy without prior Power BI knowledge. He asked, can he do it himself? Can he connect to his own database and create reports? Fernando said, yes, of course. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, of course. I would make sure. It sounds like this use case is most common. It's most common. There's a data question for discovery, and then you can Power BI is free, so of course you can just download Power BI, log in, get access. You have access to the data. It's even better because you don't have to ask anyone, and create a report and provide that solution. If it's a critical solution, then do that. If someone's asking for a report, then why not provide it? But if you have the leverage to suggest an adoption strategy for Power BI in that organization, so others can use it, and there's more of an organized use of Power BI, then I would suggest for you to create the report to show that you have that skill, and it's really not hard. If it's quite complex, then you may want to discuss that. But if it's an easy report and it takes a little time, then just create the report and then also discuss an adoption strategy of Power BI. So it's just easier to use in the organization.
Definitely, and probably take that question a little bit further, Denisha. If you do allow users to create reports of their own, potentially they can obviously create their own measures as well.
Yes.
Now, how would you recommend? Would you recommend at that point going through the adoption strategy to make sure you have one version of the truth and true calculations, or how would you look at that?
Well, so let me think about that, because it really depends on the kind of report you're creating. And even with the adoption strategy, users can create their own measures and calculations. The only time you can't do that is if you have a model created for you in like a data flow or something like that.
Yep.
So a lot of times I say create the measures and create a data dictionary, like a catalog within your Power BI report. I call it a report support page. Is that you hide it and you put there how you created your calculations. So you can just, if someone asks, what does this mean? You have it there. And if you have to pull your report up and compare it with someone else's report, then you can quickly see how you created your calculations based on another. But this common thing is also just means that you didn't go through adoption strategy, because if you went through an adoption strategy, you wouldn't be comparing your calculations with anyone, because you will have that single source of truth by discussing the common data models and things like that. So if this is another one of those things where it's okay to create the calculations, just make sure you document what you've done within the report. So if someone downloads the report, they can see everything without accessing a third tool. But when you create that thing, still recommend a strategy of adopting. You want to always recommend a better strategy if something's not working.
Perfect, thank you. And one more anonymous question. And the question is, what is the best way to share Power BI live dashboards with a number of different external clients?
Wow, nice question. So I actually am very proud to say in my past, in one of the past contracts, I worked with a team to create a web portal. It was a pre-authenticated web portal where the third party can log in and view dashboards, and they didn't need a license within my organization. And so just this, you have to have the developer skill to do this, but I'll give you the juice. So you have to, there's a way to create a URL that's pre-authenticated using your credentials, your license credentials. You would create that URL that's pre-authenticated using your skills, and then you would cover that URL with like your own domain or whatever. And give that to, say for instance, if I had a customer that I wanted to view reports that I created, but I didn't want them to have a license within my organization. I just wanted them to see reports. I wanted them to log into my own web tool and see a report that I've created for them. Then I would use that pre-authenticated URL. You like maybe Google that or something. But I would create that URL, and within that URL, I have an embedded report that I actually have access to in my environment. And on top of that embedded report is a login that I control within an app that I created. And so it's really, you really have to work around, if you're not wanting to give that user a license, which is the easiest fix, just have them to be a part of your organization. If you don't want to do that, then you have to go through the coding process of creating just a web portal, a website that embeds your reports and authenticates your license via the URL.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, we just had one come in from Marat, and they ask, is it a good idea to disable classic workspace creation?
Well, so I think this is probably biased. I don't know, but I say, I mean, classic is old. You want to know, why don't you want the new? It still works. If it works for you, it works for you. But I've been with Power BI since it started, and it only gets better. So you want to get better with it. Don't stick to the old stuff. Just update. Yeah. I mean, it's not gonna hurt your environment, but I say change it, but let me put a but there, because when you change scares people. So if you have a lot of people in your environment that's using the classic, before you make that switch that the entire tenant comes to the new workspace look, you want to make sure you train everyone on what that looks like, how they do how do they add the users now, what is a contributor. You want to make sure that everyone knows those new things. But I do think you should go through that process of updating.
Perfect, great answer. Okay, no new questions coming in just yet.
Okay.
One thing I will ask you is, you've mentioned that you're a contractor currently, so yeah. like myself, it will be interesting for our user group to get your perspective on the difference between, or how you found contract work in comparison to obviously permanent work for a company.
Yeah, well, I love contract work, and I think my love for it is mainly because I get to dabble into different industries. Their data, I'm not stuck to just finance. I'm not stuck to just marketing. I can see all kinds of industries and how they're handling data. And it allows for me as a strategist, it allows for me to understand strategy a lot better, because I have all of those viewpoints of different things. I can't give a pro because I've really never been an employee. I've always been a consultant since I finished college. So my employee work was really internships. And I honestly this is gonna sound crazy. I don't know, I'm live, huh? So I honestly, I don't like to see the same people every day. Like I like the variety of meeting new people, and contracting allows for you to meet new people and just be involved with different personalities. And I enjoy that. I think being a data person, data can get boring. I'm not gonna lie. I love data, but it could get boring if you're looking at the same data like all the time. So being a contractor, consultant, being able to speak internationally, all these things that move me around is what I enjoy.
Perfect. And for anybody that's interested in moving into contract-based work, what would be your recommendations to them?
If you're interested in contract work, I would recommend for you to advance your skill. So whatever you want that you have to find a niche. It's like for me, it's BI and storytelling, and it's changed over time. But you have to find that thing that works for you and that's going to get you through the door. Because once you get in as a contractor, because you're seeing so much, you're going to get better at so many other things, and it's going to surprise you really, because you thought you was good at just one thing, and now you're a good project manager, and now you're good at getting requirements. Like you're good at all this stuff. And you probably can even administer a whole tenant, So I would suggest for you to get good at one thing that's going to allow for you to get contracted for that one thing as an expert. And then once you're known as an expert in that one thing, then grow on it, build on it, learn some other ways to better that skill to make you more valuable. You don't have to go back to school, but you don't have to go back to school. You can, but I would suggest getting certifications or upskilling in these online courses. There's so many resources out there to learn a new tool, but I would definitely suggest to learn something new. Learn something new.
Fantastic, great advice. And yourself and Kelly Kay are actually the featured group leaders in the Microsoft community currently. So
Yeah.
can you tell us a bit more about the great work that you're doing with the Power BI Women group?
Yes, I love the Power BI Women. If there are any women here, then that's just search Power BI Women Meetup and it'll pop up. I love it there. I actually started maybe 2 years. I think it's been 2 years now. And what we do is really just we allow a safe place for women, and not saying that there's no safe place for women, but to be able to have an organization where we can talk BI, we can talk strategy, we can talk the next what's new in BI. That's just what we do. We meet twice a month. We have a town hall where we listen to a Microsoft speaker talk about there's vast topics, and then we have a learning session where it's specifically Power BI. Last week learning session was using Azure Cognitive Services to create sentiment analysis. So we have just members or user groups, all kinds of whatever you identify with, they come in and they share their knowledge. And for me, being a speaker and being a woman and just being in all of these places where I've come across people who are shy and really smart, but just shy when it comes to sharing their knowledge. The Power BI Women group allows a comfortable place for women to come on stage and share their knowledge and get feedback from people like them. And so I think, as a woman and just being, young, I'm only 27, so I'm really young, but it's just remarkable to see people step out of their comfort zones, and find places and find groups that fit for them. So Power BI Women is just that. Power BI is growing really fast, so really, really fast. And so Power BI Women is growing really fast too. I didn't even know before I joined Power BI Women, I would join Power BI groups and really be one of 4 women, or it's really hard to find women in technology. So I'm really happy that this is something that's been created for us.
Oh, fantastic. And please do keep up the great work that you're doing as well. I have shared the user group within the chat alongside all of your links as well, so our users do know where to find you. And like I say, it's been an absolute pleasure having you with us today. I'm sure you put through a lot of good advice for our users and given them a framework of how they can move Power BI forward within their organizations and get a bit more control over the situation, which I think, as you mentioned earlier, it's key.
Yes.
With a self-service BI tool. So once again, DeNisha, really, really thank you very much for being with us. And I'm sure we're going to have you with us again at the Microsoft Power BI UK user group.
Yes, I look forward to that.
Perfect, thank you. And to everybody that's joined in today, once again, it's been a pleasure to have you with us at the Microsoft Power BI UK user group. This event was brought to you in association with Onyx Data, and you could have been anywhere in the world, but you've been here once again with us. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.